Hey there, and welcome to Large Format Friday. I'm your host, Matt Marrash. If this is the first time you're stopping by the channel, there's a playlist of our entire third season of LFF. And if you haven't subscribed yet, each and every Friday, we're gonna be here and we're gonna be talking about something large format photography. It's a gorgeous day outside. There's barely any clouds in the sky, something we rarely get here in Ohio. So I'm gonna try to make today's episodes short so I can get out to shooting. I've got some Ilford Delta 100 here that I'm gonna start experimenting with because I haven't shot a lot of this film and I really want to this summer. But before I get into that, I want to talk about a little bit of large format organization. So one way to track our progress throughout our large format photographic journey is to take meticulous notes along the way. In previous episodes, you've heard me talking about using these little notebooks and a pencil or pen to kind of jot things down. And this is great for tracking individual exposures, what f-stop you were at, what your exposure reading was, all of that. But how do we tie what's in here to what's in here? Of course, we can't see the film because if we see it, it's already exposed. So we can't see it until after it's developed. We can take notes on the holder itself, and you can see these holders are already numbered. I have a 7 here and an 8 here. But how do we make a note on the film itself? Is it possible? You know, this is kind of like creating metadata for something completely analog, like our film. But there is a way to get that information onto the film itself. We can use a process called indexing or notching our film holders. So on the inside of a large format film holder, you've got 3 basic pieces. You have one dark slide, you have another dark slide, and then you have our septum and then this little flap that's taped on with some very thin bookbinding tape. The whole purpose of this little flap here is to hold everything together once the dark slide is all the way in. That little channel that it creates, though, has a plastic flap on the inside and outside of it. One way we can keep track of our film is to actually carve or notch in to the inside of this flap. One thing that's nice about notches is when you're making the exposure, that extra area that you carve out of the flap is really, really close to the film. And what that does is that shape then gets exposed onto the area of the film. The only problem with doing notching and exposing like that is the film itself already has a notch code telling you which side the emulsion side is facing up. The way I typically load film holders, I'm holding the notch code in my upper right hand, in the upper right hand corner, and I'm pushing it down in. So if I want to start using notched film holders, what's recommended is that I flip that around. So instead of holding it in the upper right hand corner and the film landing right here, I'm actually gonna have to flip it around and put it in the lower left corner, and that's gonna put the notch code here. So it doesn't get in the way of any notches that I start placing along my film holder. One of the other advantages to notching film holders is there's just no doubts. When you take notes and when you have numbered holders, there can still be a little doubt as to, well, did I really have it in this holder? When the film actually has exposed onto it which holder it came from, all that doubt is removed as long as you can read the notch successfully on the film rebate. That's why we have to do a good enough job carving in that notch. Now, there's a couple ways to notch our film, but the one thing that we will need is a clean working area, some way to clean out our film holders with a brush or maybe a low pressure air compressor, and we need some safety gloves. Once we've got those, we have our choice. We can use like a little hobby knife set, like a little X-Acto set, or we can use these little micro files. I've had these since the large format lens board solution episode way back in season 1 or season 2, and that's what I'm gonna use today are the files. I'm a little bit handier with those now. Only downside is files are gonna generate a lot of dust, so we're gonna have to be able to clean out our film holders. I'm gonna hit them with the compressor once I'm done with today's episode. So I've got my film holder, I've removed the dark slide, and I have my notch. Now, how am I gonna number these things? That's where it becomes a little bit more personal. Every photographer has their own unique solution for notching. The biggest thing is whichever one you choose, you have to remain consistent. Without that consistency, you're kind of shooting in the dark. What I'm gonna do is use a system that I'm comfortable with. I'll be able to reason even if I completely forget this stuff, and I'm gonna try to correlate what is already existing on these holders. Again, I purchased these holders pre-numbered, so I'm going to correlate the number that's up here to a notch that's readable down here inside the film holder. So this is film holder number 7. So now I need to figure out how I'm going to make the number 7 show up on my notch. Now, when I was working with Alan Ross, he recommended using a bit of a Roman numeral system where I have I, X, and V for 1s, 5s, and 10s. And that'll take me through a lot of different film holders. In Way Beyond Monochrome, the system they outlined there makes a little bit more sense because you only need a single file, but it makes a little bit less sense if you're not somebody that already understands the system they're using, which is binary. In the binary system, we can just use one size file, one shape of file, but then we're placing it differently to denote different parts of that binary code. So we would have a single notch is 1, 2 is a second notch spaced from it, 3 is both of them, 4 would be a third notch spaced out, and so on. So the binary code is nice because you only need one file, but it can be kind of confusing if you open it up, you forgot how you numbered it, and then you look and go 1, 2, 3, oh, that's number 4, when actually it might be something in binary. So if you're not comfortable counting in binary and you can recognize Roman numerals instantly, do the Roman numeral system or invent your own, which whatever you do, stay consistent. That's going to be key here. So let's get a little closer up shot and we're going to start notching this holder. Got my film holder with the dark slide out. I've got my first little file here. I'll throw some gloves on. Okay, and you can see there's a dusty mess. We're going to clean these out thoroughly before we load film into them. So I'm going to open up my flap, and we can see a little bit closer those two sides of the flap. That's the little center bit. This is the top of the flap, and this is the bottom of the flap. We only want to notch this inside portion of the flap. Once we get to the other side, we may be harming our ability to stay light tight and hold that dark slide in place. That's the whole point of this top flap. Now I've seen examples where people go all the way through it and don't seem to have any problems, but I don't want to press my luck, so I'm just going to carve into this side. Now this holder is holder number 7, so I'm going to need a V and an I and an I. So I've got this little triangle file here. It's got 3 hard edges, and I'm going to find a flat to give me some eyes, so that little flat piece. Another thing about notching with these guys, I have a V, I have an I, and I have an I. Remember, it's going to show up flipped because this is the emulsion side of the film. So if I want it to read VII, I actually have to put the V in the center and then the eyes on the outside. So my single digits are going to count from the outside in. That way it's going to read properly when I flip my film over this way. My V notch is starting to take a nice shape. I can start to read that triangle, but I want to do a little bit of cleanup work, make sure it's nice and sharp. So I'm going to take my little knife set and just get a blade and clean that up a little bit. Don't need to go too crazy on it, just like this. And this is the real reason why we're wearing gloves here, folks. There we go. And we can see on the inside here, this is going to be a nice little easy to read V for our 7. Let's get our straight flat and carve out some eyes. Same procedure. And there we go, VII. So we've got, well, it's reading IIV, but when we flip it over and expose our film, it's going to be VII. So we've got number 7. Holder 7 is done. Now, another question I've gotten on the channel in the comments and emails many times before is, what do you do once you make the exposure? What if you have a partial box of film? Many boxes of film, including this Ilford here, ship in 25 sheet boxes. Kodak gives us 10s, some older sheets will give us 50. But if we don't have the whole thing exposed at once or enough holders to contain all of this different film, how do we keep track of it then? One thing I recommend is, if you have the ability to, get some extra empty boxes of film. As you go through more film, hold on to those boxes because they'll be beneficial for labeling later. You can see there's some that I've labeled previously for how many sheets I took out during that. I always recommend marking how many shots you took out and the date. That way there's no guesswork involved. But if you don't have any empty boxes, you can use the double clamshell style boxes from paper printing. Those will have those dark bags. Those will be pretty helpful, but I still recommend taping it up so you don't accidentally open it. And it's kind of, it's part of the large format photographer's code that if somebody is in need of boxes, especially a beginner, we do not charge you money for that, only the cost of shipping. So if you need to find a photographer for that, or you need some extra stuff, let us know down below in the comments. We'll try to link you up with the right person in your region. Otherwise, paying international shipping on an empty box kind of feels like really terrible. So after about 15 minutes of elbow grease, I was able to get all 5 of these film holders notched. And again, I wasn't going from 1 to 10, I was going based on the numbers that were already on there. Everybody's gonna have their own different approach to this, and this is totally optional. You don't need to notch your film holders, especially if you've got the film sweats about it. I've been nervous about doing it. I tried one years ago and I totally botched it because I was a little too aggressive with the files. Now that I've been doing a little bit more handy stuff, and even here on the channel, I wasn't scared of it. Plus, these are 4x5 holders. I'm using these primarily for some testing. So if you have any questions about keeping track of your film holders, whether it's before exposure or after exposure, be sure to drop those down below in the comments. And let me know if you notch your film holders. What system do you use? Do you use just regular Roman numerals? Do you use the Dewey Decimal System? Do you use binary? Let me know down below. And for those long form questions, you can always shoot me an email, largeformatquestions@gmail.com. Thanks again for stopping by. We're gonna go to the credits roll right now. For those of you that are sustaining members, you're gonna see your name up here in the credits. We have 30% more members than we did last week. Let's keep that awesome momentum going. It's gonna allow me to do all the kind of crazy stuff that you're gonna be seeing, especially in the coming weeks here. So I gotta hit these things with the compressor, get some of this Delta 100 loaded up, and stay tuned. This is going to be a continuing series where we're going to talk about large format organization, because next we're going to be testing some film. Catch you next time.